Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see you all. First of all, before I do anything, my voice is a bit shot. So I've been giving classes all weekend long, and normally I don't give talks on Mondays after that. But some evil imp has done that to me for some reason. So there shall be revenge. So, so sorry, you came into this talk with a strange name, Things Happening in SG14. A kind of non-technical talk, except that there is technique, we'll see. SG14 is the study group that we have for low latency domains. So we're talking about embedded games, finances, and such. It's a thing, we'll look at the history of that thing slightly. And things have been happening recently, so I want to keep you updated on current events. That's kind of the goal. So for those who don't know me, I have a couple of kids, a couple of animals, a couple being a moot word. And I've been doing military flight simulators for a couple of years and research before I became a professor 25 years ago this year. But the reasons why I'm here today mostly is because I often work with the people who write games, which has gotten me involved in SG14 in the first place. I don't write games myself, but I do speak with them quite often, and I do provide them with training very regularly, let's put it this way. So, the abstract of this talk says, if you allow me, the C++ committee is made of a small number of working groups and a large number of study groups. There's 23 to date, as far as I know, including this one. Since pandemic times, we've been brewing a number of things, I said proposals, but it's not proposals as much as a package that will end up being a bunch of proposals at some point very soon. But there is an actual proposal in flight right now. And we'll look at what this means, where it came from, what are the principles behind the work that we've been doing, and hopefully what it means for us now. The overall project is described in a not aptly named paper called P2966R1, which is really an R0. So we have this paper system, see, where you submit papers, and if you make a mistake and you're not proficient with the paper system, you try to fix it and you end up with bumping up the revision number. So it's an R0 named R1, because I put the same name twice in the author's list. So it's a false R1, let's put it this way. So, what's the thing? SG14. Well, it was born here, but not here. It was born conceptually here, but CppCon used to be somewhere in the West Coast first. In 2014, 15, like that, Michael Wong had a discussion with a number of games people who informed him that they liked the language, but they weren't exactly satisfied with some of the aspects of what C++ was providing them with. Exception has been a sore point for a long while, among other things. They feel like they're in a ghetto. And they said, well, we would like to contribute more, but we're busy with other stuff. And yeah, so Michael and others noted that the concerns they had heard from the games people who were there had echoes in other groups, the embedded community, the finances, those who really need control over resources and performance, they were worried about some things. So they needed a room to discuss these things and make their preoccupations known, which led to this thing, SG14, being created back then. The real name is SG14 Game Development and Low Latency, but most people call that the Low Latency Group. The actual subtitle, if you look at the ISO-CPP page, is Topics of Interest to Game Developers and Other Low Latency Programmers or Programming Requirements. This is pretty much what we're doing. So we meet on Wednesdays, each month-ish, I guess, and we change chairs from session to session. Sometimes it's mostly games-oriented, sometimes it's mostly embedded, sometimes it's mostly finances, high-frequency trading, and such. So Michael shares the sharing with other people when that suits the topic. And it's a place for experts to discuss. So we hear what this community has to say and try to make subjects advance through the proposals process that will make the language more welcoming to these people who are actually a big group of users for the language. I mean, if you use C++, it's probably because you want that control in the first place, at least for some of us. We got some output from that already. So early on, for C++17, we had a number of uninitialized memory algorithms to complete a small set that we already had in the language. Not really used by the containers that we have, but used by those who write their own containers without allocators mostly. So that came from SG14. We had flat map, flat set who are coming in the language. I had a complaint by my friend Ben earlier saying they're not context-aware enough. We'll try to work on that. C++20, likely and unlikely. Some people don't like it. That's cool. So optimization hints. When you know what you're doing and you're willing to retest your assumptions quite often because these could go stale. The compiler writers keep telling me, you know, these things could go wrong at some point. So test your stuff, but still, why not? This new unique address thing that some people are scared of, that lets you have 0 size-ish objects in your code sometimes if your compiler supports it, and that has weird semantics that probably shouldn't be an attribute in the first place, but that kind of comes from the work that we've been doing. There's freestanding efforts by Ben Craig and a number of others who want to clarify what it means to host a C++ runtime in a place where there's not much to support it, and you have restrictions, like no memory allocation and stuff like that. That's partly SG14 work. We have a new container coming in called Hive that has some interesting performance characteristics for this domain of application. It's not there yet because there's resistance, but it's been in the works for many years now, and it's very close. That's changed name over time. And there's a number of other stuff there. So there's already been quite a bit of work stemming from that thing. We have a big spreadsheet. We're also following works in other groups that seem interesting to the community. But I'm here to talk to you about this new thing, P2966, a very sexy name if there's one. That's been automatically generated by the paper system. So where did it come from? So you have to go back in your mind to the pre-pandemic times, 2019-ish, let's put it this way. And I told Nicolas I would say it's his fault because it is. Nicolas Fleury is one of the architects at Ubisoft Montreal. So I live close to the Montreal area, and this is where I do most of my teaching. And we have this big, big game community there. Their studio is pretty big. And Nicolas is someone I deal with from time to time. He does come to CppCon. He's given talks here in the past. He says we have to talk. So I went, after one of my classes, went for coffee with him, and he says, I have a number of gripes. There are things we need to fix. It's getting on my nerves. And he had this list. So coffee, taking notes, exchanging. This, I don't think it's a real gripe. Oh, yeah, this makes sense and all. So I'm trying to make a list of his perspective on things that the language works. But there are nits that are making his work and the work of his team more difficult than it should be. We'll see why. So I'm taking notes, trying to understand what's going on. And then the goal is to bring this to SG14 and discuss things and see what we can push as a group, what interests the whole community, not just this specific company. So then I contacted other places, IDOS, the guys who do Unreal Epic, and a number of others like that with whom I deal regularly. Some of them contributed some other ideas. We're building this list, And then this thing happens. That did have an impact on my working time. I don't know if you know, I'm a professor, so I've been working like 24 hours a day for like 2 years. So that has slowed down progress quite a bit. And they were hoping for C++23, but I was stalled for 2 years. At some point, we got not free time, that would be pushing it a bit, but time enough at least to put together what I would call a proto paper. So not something that's a proposal. You won't find it anywhere unless if you're working with us at SG14, because we have been looking at it, discussing it, making changes and stuff. So it was presented in a, as I say, very preliminary state, the point being we wanted to discuss the thing, so get feedback. And it's good feedback, because people there are bright. They know what they're doing, and they have real problems too. So mostly a positive reaction, because you talk to people like that, they have common interests, they have common problems too. So the ideas, even though they came from the games industry, seem to be fitting for the group. So some of the ideas were met with enthusiasm. So some it's not clear, some of them still require clarifications today. Some revived ideas that I didn't try, put aside, and seem to need to come back. There are ideas that seem to make their way through other means, because the means of SG14, they exist otherwise too. Okay? Some we put aside, just didn't fit, or we had better solutions or whatever. And some had workarounds. So we discussed, and we tried to figure out, first, is this something we want to push? Because people could still bring their own proposals, but if we want to bring something that SG14 wants, we have to agree on it. Should the things be pursued as a bunch of proposals at once, or individually speaking? Could we just teach the community to do things otherwise? If there's an existing solution, maybe that's the best thing to do. Whatever. So we dropped stuff, added stuff. People said, oh, cool project, I'm going to add my own requests. That proto paper still exists. And it's important because it's a working draft with examples and actual details of problems that you will not find in a published paper because it would have made like a huge monster. But there's a lot of stuff in there that can serve as a basis to explore the design space of these proposals, or at least find out what the actual requesters actually meant if we don't get it. So we're keeping that thing. It's still useful. That paper, then, what is it? It's a progress report, because we've done a lot of work over a number of years now. So now, as Jordan said, we need to say what we're doing. Otherwise, the community will be working in isolation. It doesn't work. So what you will see if you read that paper, but I will show you, is the principles on which the effort is based. The things we have explored, the things that might be explored, the things that probably won't be, and such things. So this is what I'm going to try to present to you today. So it's a progress report. The expectation with this thing, because it's not an actual proposal for features, it's stating what we're working on. So what we're hoping is that the requesters, people like me who attend committee meetings, and other people interested will want to pitch in and push the ideas that seem to matter to them the most, so that we can advance this thing as a whole, hopefully. Now, C++ is a big thing, and we're not alone. So we have these two big papers that exist already, P2000 and P0592, again, very sexy names. One is the direction groups, so a small group of people who try to orient the work of WG21, the committee, as to where we should go with the language overall, a broad plan. And P0592, I hope I have this one right, because it has a weirder number, is trying to define how we should prioritize the work we're doing. I'm pointing these two out because it's important. A number of things in P2966 are small. It's the whole thing that when you get it together, is sending a message of a need or a set of requirements that people would like to get. So individually speaking, I'm not sure they would fit in the grand plan. But as a bunch, considering the size of the community, I'm hoping it will. So we have these two papers, as I said. One comes from the direction group, small group of wise people. And the other one says, well, if it's not that important, people should put it aside for a moment because we have bigger fish to fry. When these were written, P2966 didn't exist yet. It's a recent paper, it's been published last month. It's something that groups, as I said, small things that might not fit individually, but hopefully, in the big picture, it's a drop that makes more noise. The aim of 2966 is to be revised regularly to be an updated progress report. So show that some things have advanced, something that has been rejected, something that's changed. So we're hoping to, like the other two direction papers that are more important, probably, it's hoping to show progress. And there will probably be new stuff added to that, and hopefully something that will go away because it will be classified as done. But it will be public. And that's the plan. It's based on principles. So before we started working on things, we said, what are we trying to achieve, and what are the things we care about enough to orient our reflections, even though it's a hodgepodge-ish thing, I guess. So the contributors to the effort, large group of people, have committed to a number of things. The first one being this. It might surprise people, but this is the first thing that came to mind. Things that simplify the language in the eyes of the people who work on it are good. But there's a reason for that. So that doesn't mean the language has to be slower. It means if it's more simple to understand and express, we'll tend to gain from it. Things that make the language more teachable are good, kind of ties along with that. But there's a reason for that again. The games industry, at the very least, they have a very high turnover rate, get lots of juniors, and people who have only done other languages in their career before that, and they have to understand what we're doing. This is an important one. So avoiding negative performance impacts. There are some things in the work right now for security, safety in the language that will have a performance impact. So that crowd needs a way to opt out because they think it's better for them not to pay that price. They need those bytes. They need those microseconds. And debugging matters. That's something they do a lot with big programs that don't necessarily fit well in memory all the time. So they need better tools, or they need things that let them debug their code. If we look at it from a closer perspective, so the thing we need to know now, not each of the suggestions that you will see there will fit with all of these principles, but we're trying not to go against them, at the very least. So if someone brings something that will slow down the language, we'll try to make sure that when we build an optimized release of something, we can opt out of it. That's at least the goal. There. It also influences the way we look at other things, because SG14 is consulted regularly about things done in other groups. So it taints the way we respond to things. Cool. So if we look at them closer, simplifying the language. So some of the suggestions that you will see, because we'll make some kind of a list, try to reduce the number of gotchas, quote, quote, faced by C++ programmers, because there are things that are easy to mess up in this language. I'm sure you didn't know that. But it does happen that we make mistakes. And reduce the number of workarounds needed for these people to make their games work. I've heard things like, and it's not a complete list, but things that make generic programming simpler are really appreciated. My ears hear that concepts are a good thing, but damn, they would like their engines to get up to speed and get to C++20, not be stuck at 17. That's what I hear. One needs to understand how the code will run when they look at the source code. It seems like the new programmers we get today, sometimes they look at the source code and they have no clue what's going to happen. That's scary. Unexpected side effects are to be avoided. So if you have side effects, it's better if you plan for them. Kind of cool. This is self-evident. Well, to them, it's something that preoccupies them. So they don't see that as self-evident right now. The teachability thing. Well, as I said, they have a big turnover rate, so they keep training new people. So things that are obstacles to new people learning C++, if we could have less of these, they would be kind of happy because it reduces costs, you know? And it makes it easier to integrate new people and to keep them. You know, they don't get scared. As I said, for the negative performance costs, well, these things happen, that's okay. There are things in their list that will probably have costs or impacts in terms of performance. They're hoping to have a way to opt out of such things in their release builds. Cool. And the debugging thing, well, there are some features that only make sense in so-called debug builds. They wouldn't use them to ship code in the first place. Maybe they would, I don't know, but they recognize that the people working on the standard, they don't look at release or debug builds. This is like an implementation detail. But they would like sometimes to be able to express their needs in such a way that it can be recognized by the text of the standard, even though it's not, the standard is concerned about an abstract machine, not a real machine. Yeah. They build games that are very big, and when you build them in so-called debug mode, doesn't fit in RAM. So they have to debug in so-called release modes sometimes. And they're trying to find a way to debug their code nonetheless in a reasonably acceptable manner. And some of them scare, Ben's gonna love this one. I'm not looking at you, Ben, but I can feel you cringing. Some think that design style that we have today, such as monadic programming, functional programming, and such stuff, make it harder to understand what's going to happen looking at the source code. Now, maybe it's an education problem, but it is a worry from the community, so I have to report it. Okay. It's something that teachers have to work on, maybe. And of course, when you have call stacks that are too deep, debugging is more of a pain. So newer things that we have these days, these move and forward that tend to become intrinsics when you look at stuff through the debugger, it's helpful. So they're asking for more of that. So now, if you haven't looked at the paper, it's a big paper, there's a lot of stuff in there. We need to turn these things into proposal. We'll look at the list. So SG14 has a commitment. It's to write papers that will help the requests come to adoption at some point in such a way that the language is better in their eyes to do the work. There are efforts that will come to fruition through other means. There's work done in LEWG these days that directly goes in the direction that we want it to go, so that's perfect. SG14 will go behind these people and try to help. That's the intent, at the very least. If we realize that the proposals can be done better otherwise, that's fine. So SG14 is fine with this. What the group has accepted to do is try to publicize these facts to the community better, such that people know what to do to get the results they wanted to get in the first place. And if there's competing proposals, like there are quite many. If I look at the static reflection stuff, among other things, there's a lot of approaches that have come into play over time. SG14 is willing to take a look and say, well, to us, this one seems more interesting for this and that reason. At least it's a moral commitment to that. Okay, so after all this, what are these requests? We're still okay? Cool. So we can group them in categories. There's a few. This is what we have. So this is not requests. This is the groups that have come to my attention over the time that we have developed this thing so far. As you can see, it's a varied list. So I tried in this presentation to give you at least an outline of each of these, so that you know what people have discussed. It's not a closed set. If you have good ideas, come to me. Okay? And we'll see how we can make it fit in there. And if you think something is terrible, you can come to me too. Okay? That's fine, we'll discuss it. I've already had some pushback from the committee with at least one of the proposals in there, people saying, this is not the way to do things. To which I responded, well, we'll discuss it. I mean, I'm just the bearer of the message. It comes from the ground, it comes up. Look, any grouping is imperfect, I guess, but it's just to organize our thoughts, okay? The categories are not closed, the requests are not closed. Let's go through them one by one. Compile time computing. What has been brought to my attention from that group? Again, it's not a closed set. One of the requests that has come over and over to our attention is people would like some way to overload their functions based on const_expr arguments to have a way to do things in the cases where some of the arguments are known at compile time and do other things when they're not. We know that there are workarounds in some cases. Ben has one, I know that. I've seen his blog post on this. There has been work in the past. There's a risk of explosion of the number of overloaded functions that could be regenerated. There's things to be, there's design space to explore, but things like that have been asked for. That my format thing there, it has two signatures. One of them is const_expr, the other one is not. So the intent would be to have one of them preferred in a case and the other one preferred in the other case. Cool. things like this. You all see it? Okay. Something like this too. So in the case where you might want to store just a pointer to some static storage in one case and do something different and allocate in some other case. They would like the freedom to be able to do things like that. This is the proposal. If you like the idea, there's work to be done now because there's space to explore, there's dark corners to things like that that we need to look at, there's dangers. Maybe it's not feasible, but we have to look into it. Cool. Okay. Another one there. So this actually came from real code. So a command line argument that behaves in one way when it's a string known at compile time, it doesn't compile at all in some other cases. Okay. There's a general blanket statement that static reflection would be a good thing. Now, probably everyone agrees with that, I guess. But though I've heard people not like the idea, fearing that it will shear the language into dialects. But since there's work underway, and we won't do that because there's a group doing just that. The SG14 group said, well, globally we want it, and we'd like to push that thing into the community to make it better known, maybe. There are specific things, though, that they would like to have. A way to query the name of a variable from the source code, maybe, in order to generate better messages when they log stuff, I guess. Declaration source location, like where was that thing declared in my source code? Like of a cousin of source location, maybe. Some kind of reflection of the enums, we'll get back to that, but how many symbols are there in that thing? Are the values consecutive or are there holes in there? Maybe a way to cast to the underlying type, but with checks to make sure you don't go overboard. Let's see. And ways to iterate over members, probably for logging facilities again, or for networking purposes, I guess. This is not syntax. All of these things are not proposals yet. Okay, so don't be scared about that dollar sign thing. It could be something else. There is something on compile time, string interpolation, or close to it, P741. It exists. Work is underway. But people have expressed an interest into being able to at least have static assert messages that can be formatted based on compile time information. And it's been said that runtime formatting of strings like other languages have would be a good thing too in some cases. So again, it's not a proposal. It's something that people would like to have and would be willing to work on. This is a big chunk. Okay? So as you can imagine, in that group, there's a lot of people who are worried about predictability of execution. If you're doing real-time systems and you're taking a bit too much time, you might hurt someone or break something that costs some money. So one of the things in there is we have a number of types that can do small object optimization in the language right now. We kind of have the whole list, I think. String is in there, function is in there. If you're writing code that shouldn't allocate according to you at the very least, maybe you don't want to use function in case your compiler vendor has an implementation that for your types would allocate. So you would like at least to know if you were going to run into trouble, if this is trouble to you, of course. So static asserting could be a thing there saying, well, with this implementation, if my type is too big, I'd rather it doesn't compile. Otherwise, I'm gonna mess up my matrix. Or again, being able to do an if-const expr or some other kind of compile time-based decision as to, I would like to use SD function, but if my vendors allocates with this, this threshold, I'm going to switch to my homemade version. That's pretty good too. Maybe not the standard one, but like cool enough. And I won't start to allocate if I really don't want to. Cool. This is something I've already inquired about. It's totally doable. It's just a matter of, what form should it take? Should it be a trait? Should it be some kind of other facility? How should we expose that kind of information? There's design space to be explored. Sorry, it could actually solve problems though. We have an in-place function that never allocates in the SG14 repo. There's a number of function-like types already in the standard. Maybe this one already exists in a sense with the new ones that have come up. I have to explore. But there has been a request for that because some game companies really never want to allocate with these things. It's kind of like a function, but that never allocates. If it's too big, it just doesn't compile. A small object optimization enabled vector or vector-like thing has been requested a number of times. Right now, vector cannot do that for a number of reasons that are written in the standard text. That might already be done because there's an in-place vector, P0843, that has been accepted, but I haven't had a chance to look at it to see if it matches the use case. But there is a request for that. David Stone, a few years back, had a talk on static vector here at CppCon 2. That might be a good fit. We need to look into that. But there's a need for this. So if it's solved, cool. If it's not solved, we have something to pursue. Some of the game companies have what they call an external buffer vector. So a vector that manages something that is provided externally. I think it's probably solved by the PMR stuff. We just have to see if it's a good fit because there's virtual calls in there. But there is a request for that because I'm not sure that the game companies that use that, they actually use virtual function calls. They just stick the buffer and manage it. We'll see. Yeah.
Virtual function calls PMR are fine.
Sorry?
PMR is fine. The virtual function.
Marvelous. If it's fine, perfect. But I think it's cool, but I just need to check with the people who have done the request if it matches their model of what that thing should do. But the thing is, I think it's okay, but I'm not the requester. So we have to check that thing. And that's what I said to those who gave me pushback with the paper 2 weeks ago. It's my paper, but it's our paper. So people have come with requests. We look for guidance, and then we'll see if that guidance fits with the need as expressed. Sometimes it might be me who hasn't expressed the need properly in the paper, so we're gonna have to make fixes. So if it's cool, problem solved, you know? We'll see where it goes. Intrusive containers. Guys already said to me, we use these less these days. Some companies still use them. Maybe they're not relevant anymore, but you have to check. We're talking there about containers, mostly lists, really, where instead of having something external to your type that you're putting in, a node that contains your thing, the node is aware of the fact that it's within the list. And there's some operations that could be faster with this. So there has been a proposal in the past. I was one of those who discussed it in an earlier meeting, P0406. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not good anymore. It came from, I think it was inspired by the Boost intrusive containers back then. So if people are interested really in that, we could look at it again, maybe revive it if it's good. And if we see, because Guy was saying his latest metrics seem to tell us that maybe it's not as relevant as it used to be, let's measure this thing. And if there are better alternatives, well, we'll pursue them instead. Some people do inheritance with vector to have something that manages the buffer and passes the buffer up there. This one, I need to verify things because I have a request, I have actual code, but I want to make sure that we're doing the thing the requester wants, but it's another way of doing containers, managing buffers that might be done through other means today, but I left it there because exploration required. That's important though. There's a global request for an alternative to all of the functions that allocate buffers. Because in this industry, most of the time, they know what their needs are in the first place, and they would like to be able to supply their own buffers instead to avoid allocations. We would need to make a list, of course, and have an overall design for this thing, but the global request is, there's a number of functions that I know of that require this. I put candidate for freestanding on this one and some others. Freestanding often requires no allocation. So if we can get this global blanket requirement working, it might allow us to take a bunch of functions into freestanding that weren't there in the first place, at least with the new signatures. Could be cool. And no RTTI guarantees. There are some places where we give leeway to implementers to use dynamic cast and other RTTI things for implementing such things as PMR containers. That scares some of the games people away, and they would like to be able to make sure that it will never happen to them. You know, I know it's a QI thing, but they would like to put in a few words in there to say, don't do that. because we won't be able to use your stuff if you do. Some people have asked, and I must admit that this one I don't know why, but I've heard it a few times, to have lambdas that you can kind of default construct and initialize later. We'll see the use case, okay, but it's there because it's been requested. And towards the end, just before publishing the paper, Matt Bentley from New Zealand, who's worked on Hive for years, said, you know what? We have this trick that we all do in games. Like when we want to remove something from a vector, we swap it with the last element of the vector and we pop back instead if we don't care about the order, because it's so much faster to remove at the end than to remove in the middle. And I know, I show that to my students. But he noticed, he ran benchmarks and said there's many ways to do this wrong in practice, depending on the container. So this is the kind of algorithm that could actually benefit everyone if we actually standardize this thing, because if it was done right for the containers that we have, we wouldn't have surprises. And he actually has cool benchmarks for this. So this is a last-minute insertion that could, I think, go pretty fast if we can actually discuss this with the library implementers and see that they agree with us. So this is where we are with these. There's a number of requests tied to attributes, some of them that will probably benefit the rest of the community if it gets headway. This one needs a lot of exploration. So letting users supply their own attributes, because you need to associate meaning with this. But the intent from the requester was to replace macros with other stuff that are more in language and guide their code generation. There's a number of people in the games industry that use other languages for their tooling because they don't find our facilities sufficient, and they would like to use attributes to fix that in a sense. But it's a very vague one right now. This probably touches many people in the room. Invalidate dereferencing. They would like to be able to annotate things such as the arguments passed to realloc, to say, after the call to this function, dereferencing the pointer might not be a good idea anymore. Please give me an error if I do that, because it might be a new buffer, not the old buffer that I got. This can be done in the library, of course. I'm pretty sure that your vendor does that with his own stuff, but they would like to be able to do that in their own code to mark such parameters sometimes as, if you dereference this thing after the call, you're in trouble. Cool. So they want a compile time error. They know that it's QOI for the library code. They would like to be able to do it themselves within the language. Yeah. So to them, it's a UB pitfall. It's a trap that they're mostly junior, but sometimes senior programmers fall into often. This one is kind of like this, but it's more for things like free. You know, you freed something, well, you shouldn't use that thing anymore unless you reassign to it with something new. Same thing. They would like to be able to mark their own functions with the same kind of stuff that the standard library does its own to reduce the number of pitfalls in their code. And they want an error if you do that. There has been an SIMD request at some point, but it's been dropped just before I published the thing because there's actual SIMD work underway and it's going well. There are discussions. I know that operator equal with the SIMD types is a tricky thing, understand that. But it's going well enough that this one will be pursued. It's there for traceability purposes. One of them is no copy. So, you know, when you're, during my class last weekend, we discussed RVU at some point, and people were surprised that if you create a default object and then assign to it, you don't get as good code gen as if you create your object with the result of a function call. Some people discover that. So there's something missing in our teaching sometimes. So this one is saying, I don't intend those who call this function to use a return type to copy something. They better use it otherwise, because otherwise I want a warning or an error or something like that. That wasn't the intent. So the thing in comment in the middle, some type st equals bar, is intended to be a problem, give you an error, something like that, because the writer of the function, his or her intent was not to permit that, because probably, I guess, the return type is a heavy thing. So there are workarounds for that, I know that. Okay? You can, You can delete the default the copy constructor. Say, there's things you can do with this, or the copy assignment, or things like that. But it's hard to teach to the new people. And as the requester said, their code evolves, and sometimes the workarounds they don't survive well. Close to that, same kind of intent, RVO. That thing is meant to be used in RVO situations only. That's the intent there. So it kind of fits with the other one, but the other one maybe had a wider scope of it. There is a basis for that. Clang has something that looks like this a bit that we could use as a basis for exploration. This is interesting because it comes again and again and again. I had to champion a proposal about that like years ago too. We've tried to add pure functions in the language for a while, some of us at least, but nobody agrees on what pure means. It's no problem. Because we have exceptions, references, global state, blah, blah, blah. Can you log in a pure function, blah, blah. But we've had, with contracts recently, the idea of a conveyor function that just conveys information. That's essentially a pure function. We have prior art. All compilers have markers to say this function shall not have side effects. You can memorize it if you feel like it, but there's nothing portable. So this is like, again, people trying to get that idea in the language rather than in the tools that are around it to let people write portable code with such assumptions. But there's pitfalls there. It needs to be well explored, well defined. This is not a proposal. It's a wish for something. Cool? And there has been a lot of work on that. We have cases where our containers could be faster if we could just like move a chunk of memory somewhere else with a memcopy and just say it or something like that. There's been lots of progress with this. SG14 has obviously interest in such a feature. You might be surprised to see move semantics in there because move works well. I like move. But the game companies, they get juniors, and juniors, they get familiar with move semantics when they enter the company, and they do copy-paste because they're writing new code. So they end up with things like that. Look at the bottom one. That happens quite a bit, okay? It's totally illegal, but it won't give you the move semantics we were looking for. It happens that they get a lot of such code. So they would like a way for the language or the tool that we have to report something there, or inform people that this is not the way you should do things. There's no like advantage to doing that. Okay? I have a very small thing about handling disappointment, but it's a, yeah, please.
Is there anything for the no except with move? Because I know that's another trick with vectors and stuff.
What do you mean by no except of move?
There was something, I can't remember the exact detail, but it's like if you're trying to use things in a vector and you don't have
okay, so please. So if you want to know, so if you're, okay, it's out of scope, but allow me for a second. If you're writing your own move constructor and move assignment, you will get much better benefits if you mark them as no except. Okay? Because effectively in your vector, if you're growing your vector, you're going to be able to move your elements and don't use any exception handling anywhere to protect yourself instead of making copies and being careful. It's not always possible to do so. So it's not a language thing. Think about linked lists, where your implementation allocates sentinel nodes at the extremities. Some of the standard ones do, and it's right because it does better code in general. But since you're allocating at the extremities, when your move constructor comes into play, it's going to do a new. So it's not much a language thing. It's more of in your own code. If you can do it, do it. But we cannot enforce it because there's valid reasons not to do that.
Yeah, I was thinking it could be like a warning or something. Because it seems like a common case like the const that people also often forget.
Okay, so if you're asking for a warning, write me a little something so that I know. But know that we will need an opt-out because there are valid reasons to do it still. It's very important to remember that. Okay. This is important because exceptions have been a pain point for a long while now. No, I use exceptions. It's not a problem. The game community doesn't for good reasons for them. And the narrative for that is very long. I have pages and pages and pages of this. So there's two things there. The Herb, what they call Herb exceptions, you know, those value-based exceptions that Herb has brought a bit to the fore a bit before C++23, that they put aside right now, not to derail other stuff, but that are still interesting. It's well received by that community. But there's the whole bigger narrative of they feel we don't understand why they don't use that thing. So for some of them, it's a religion thing. We cannot do anything about that. But there's other reasons for them not using that. So there's a plan to have an entire paper at some point saying, look, this is our reality, and this is why we're like this. It's not because we don't like you. So it's going to come at some point. The narrative is complex. It's something that needs to be written with care. I find it interesting to discuss these things because even though I'm a user of that thing, I can see their point of view. This is a global thing. Pattern matching, they are really looking forward to that. And at some point, if there's competing proposals, they're planning to take a stance. Tooling is important for them because they write a lot of tools, and often not in C++. Because for some reasons, while other languages tend to give them better results for that. One of the things they would like to have is this, a way to, as I said, get the name of a variable from the source code. So there was this reflection thing earlier. This would be an alternative with an operator. Some languages have that. So there's some kind of prior art. There's something in Rust. There's something in C#. There's something that has been reported to be by one of the contributors to SG14. It's a GitHub repo. It's probably macro-based. I didn't look at it yet. So there might be ways to do something interesting with this. Let's see. Let's see where it leads us. This is, of course, a big wish. No? Better compile time, error detection. Like, who doesn't want that? But there's a hope to use concepts for this. I think what they're trying to say with this is, damn, we would like our engines to get up to speed and use C++20. That's the overall thing there. So clarifying to them what the compiler sees, what it doesn't see, because they have trouble figuring out what's going on when they see the source code and what it generates. It's obscure to them sometimes. We have a complex language. We do. So they want to write more debuggable code. But you know, what is really required there, it will need some work from the requesters and others, I guess, to define the contours of this and say, okay, this is really what we want. It's not a whole big thing that's messy. We have a real need there. This surprised me. You know, you probably used if-def, elif, and diff, whatever, for platform-dependent code if you're here. I've done that quite a bit in the past myself. But what I heard quite a bit when someone said, I would like to do it with something else than if-def and else-if, because it just keeps some chunks of my code to me and I don't see the rest. So I have errors that creep in the non-compiled parts that I might have been able to fix otherwise. It's something that needs to be explored, because you know, you won't be able to call functions that don't exist on your platform, so there's things to look at. But they would like something that is not macro-based, to get errors when they compile for Intel, even though they're not looking at the ARM code or something like that. So we would need to define where this is going, but you know, we're talking about people who do a lot of cross-platform code with a lot of weird architectures sometimes. So it's a real need there. So if we can define something that's cool, it will benefit the community as a whole. If you follow the discussions on networking, you know, it's a thorny issue. Would you like to have standard networking? Yeah, so a few hands, yeah. Well, if you looked at the API that we have in C so far, you probably want networking. You know, it's all union-based and dates like 50 years back. So they asked for a small low-level layer, including sockets. But the thing with networking is that some people have said, we're in 2023, we need security for this. This probably will never fly for standard networking, I guess, because security is a realm of very specialized expertise. We're all generalists, so it will be hard to make that thing by ourselves. You know, it requires keeping up with the times. It's a thorny thing. I'm not sure that the standard library people want to be imputable for this. But yeah, so I've had complaints that Boost ACO is cool, but it's a bit heavy, starting to show its age maybe too. What the games people told me is that they would use a low-level standard library, something that does the basic stuff and build on top of that probably. The discussions that said, well, we need security with the basic socket stuff. The games people at SG14 told me, well, not everyone needs security. For us, the basic thing that makes it work and work fast is what we need. The rest we'll build around. For embedded people, they told me, well, a small and low-level interface is what counts for us too. For the devices we're on, this is the thing we need. They also told me that they're all using the same basic low-level stuff right now. So it's all based on the same groundwork stuff. So maybe there's inspiration to take there and just have something simple that works and build on top of that instead of trying to do the overarching thing all at once. We'll see. Not much there, but still, some things with parallel and concurrent computing. What I heard was we would like to have more information on our thread safety problems when we compile the code. Some languages manage that. Well, you'll tell me it's another language model. Yes. Maybe there's a way to add things to the language to make this possible. There has been some effort on client side, it seems, with thread safety analysis. I have a link to that that I can provide to people who want to work on this. Some languages can do that. Naming, tracing, debugging, being able to name threads and mutexes. I know not all platforms let you do that. But there's something cool going on. Corentin Jabot, 2019 is the paper number, has done a lot of progress on that and other similar sites. So I'm kind of hoping this will work. I have gripes with that paper, but I like the overall direction. There's a little thing I don't like in it. Same thing, controlling thread priority, thread stack size. Those who have been here for a long while, they know I've talked about that in the past. There's been prior work again. So the games people do not use our threading facilities in large part because they cannot control these things. So they need that. The problem with these things is that these are things that you set when you create your threads, so you cannot change them afterwards, and your threading API leaves you no place to do such a thing. So we need a way to do that. P 2019, what it does is provide you a factory function that creates threads. Cool. I think the problem with it right now is that it returns a fully constructed object and there's no way to report an error. So since it has this signature, the only way to report an error, a failure to comply, would be an exception. Through it, an exception for errors, no games people will use that. So, but we're getting somewhere. And they said that some people in their industry uses Aloka in scary ways and they would need to do something about that. But I don't have the details and I'm kind of scared to look. I've had requests for better logging facilities. Of course, who wouldn't want that? We could use Jason Turner's facility from today, but I think it has a bug if you were there. But they're saying that reflection and stack trace could help too. We have people working on numeric in the room right now. So there's been requests for linear algebra, but we're lucky it's coming. We have good people working on that, and I have confidence. Mark Homan is working on this. Guy has worked on this in the past. I don't know if he's still doing that. So SG14 would like to have at least the basics because they're always rewriting these things everywhere. I heard things like, in general, it would be good if what we can do in HLSL could be done in C++ instead. We'd like that. Interesting thing, we overflow on signed integers right now, but we don't overflow on unsigned integers. But could be interested to do so sometimes as an opt-in feature, of course, for various reasons. So there are companies that have aliases for types that do that. So they might be interested in a way in the language to say that their unsigned integrals can overflow. And there's a lot of other stuff. I've heard about that. I'd like to be able to take a pointer to base from a pointer to derived without having the complete type in some cases. But I can't say in my class forwarding that there's an inheritance relationship between these two. I would like to be able to do that. Now there's traps there, but maybe there's something to do. That namespace class thing that you see there is because those who separate their code in .h.cpp files, they don't like repeating the class name all over the place. They would like to have some kind of blanket thing, like instead of saying the bold face you see below there, so x colon colon, x colon colon, x colon colon everywhere, to have a namespace class x and say, well, I'm within the scope. It's just a syntactic convenience. But if you're telling me modules solve all that, of course. But in the meantime, these things they exist and they will exist for a while. A weird one. Construct with an integer value, saying I don't want more than one constructor call involved in this, even if there's a chain of things and conversions going on. Putting an upper bound on the number of constructors called on that line. We'll see. We'll explore. Okay? But I'm going to give you the entire text, though. It's interesting. Simply put, we're looking for ways to protect some important performance properties of our code against accidental upstream modifications. We want compilation to fail at the call site if someone, employee or vendor, accidentally modify the class somewhere that suddenly causes extra copies and allocations to happen. Ew! Otherwise, small problems like this pile up and become big problems that are only caught much later when profiling, and then we lost the reason why it happened. So that's the actual intent. So maybe it's not the right solution, but that's what they're trying to do. I found it was a good example of the reason why this is not a proposal paper. It's stating things that are going to be worked on. I know I'm getting close to the end. Flags only enum. So there's interesting properties tied to that. There's been prior work. There's tricks to match this. So it could influence the way we make strings, especially if there's two values with the same number. Adding member functions on enums, especially for conversions. It's been reported to me, and that's very interesting, that our enum-based strong types don't play well with arrays these days. So just take a look at the examples. There's some of them that don't compile. It's kind of awkward that they don't. Maybe there's something we're doing wrong. I don't know. We have to explore this thing, but yeah, look at them. It's preoccupying a bit. This is the current state of things. Initializer list has been a pain point for a long while. Okay, we're finishing in a few minutes. The fact that it's not movable is a performance problem in some cases. There's been efforts on that. And as you probably know, there are some rough edges to that thing, to the point that some companies refuse to let people use it. It's actually a pretty important feature of C++. You know? So when companies say don't use that, it's a sign. But they're finding that hard to enforce on big code bases because there's so many people working on it. So I've seen things like that. People say don't use initializer list, use this instead. They have their own wrapper to solve our bugs, you know, because it's a bug. Let's be honest, you know? It's a bug. So there's something we have to do at some point. This we don't look good with this. Efficient downcasting, quick thing. In some cases, they need to cast to the most derived types. When they do that with dynamic cast or such things, they end up with RTTI and other things. They have tricks that involve having vtables sorted in a way that can do that very efficiently. But there's no portable way to specify how this is going to work, so they have to wire that inside every platform that they work on and every compiler they work with. They'd like to have something that's more portable. They'd like to be able to clone with unique pointers, but right now they're not covariants. So when you're doing class hierarchies and trying to clone, you end up returning raw pointers and wrapping your unique pointers around that. There's solutions to that. They're not pretty. This is minor, but they'd like to be able to do a variadic with all elements of the same type without having to resort to tricks. There are tricks to make it work. There's at least two, probably more. But the simple one up there, they'd like to make it work. Named arguments, I know. There's a workaround, but it's a consistent request, comes out again and again. An important but tough one, being able to move from struct of array to array of struct, or distinguish the physical layout of your class from the visible layout of your class, because what reads well is not always the most performant thing. I don't know what shape it will take, but this is definitely something that comes again and again and again. And of course, I know this is, I won't even say it out loud. I know it's tough, okay? But to them, it's a tooling problem. And finally, modules. They would like so much, this is again for the game engines, I guess, people to get on with modules because their compile times are terrible. So where are we going? I know I have 2 minutes. Where is it going now? Following people. Okay, so these are all requests. There will be more. I won't write all of those papers. I won't. I'm going to help with some of them. We can find champions for some of them. So if you're interested, if some of these ideas interest you, contact me. Or just come to the SG14 meeting on Wednesday and come have a talk, okay? Because we're gonna have an SG14 meeting here at CppCon. There's design space aplenty to explore. In some of the cases, I already have authors and co-authors, and some others I have the requesters only. We can find champions if you cannot make it to meetings. As long as I understand the papers, I can present them, that's okay. And you have to be willing to get committee guidance and feedback, because sometimes they'll send you tomatoes, and sometimes they'll say it's good, and sometimes it will take many iterations to work. It's just part of the process, okay? And if you write things to me saying, I would like to write, because I need to track these things, and I'm doing many things at the same time, okay? So this is a call to arms. Thank you. Yes, Ben, the monetic thing is not my fault.
I have a question. Is SG14 working at all with WG14?
It probably
Which is the
should.
C standard body for folks that don't know.
I'm sure there are people who are on both.
Because I'm thinking of things like hash embed, which I think is favorably, and C23 has 2 new attributes, unsequenced and reproducible, which do something like pure function marking.
Amazing. Look, if they adopt that thing, it will solve one of our problems at the very least. So that's so. So I don't know if there's people in the SG. Well, there's Michael. I saw Michael earlier. Michael's there. I'm sure he's doing both, but he has a lot of stuff on his plate. There's people doing both committees. I know that, but I would have to look if they are in SG14 on Wednesday. So it's a good point. Thank you. I'll look into it. Anything else? Have a nice day.